The repatriation of victims of the Nigeria building collapse will take longer than expected. Government officials can't say exactly when the bodies of those killed will be repatriated to South Africa. Let's get a bit more detail on the story. I'm joined in studio by our Africa producer, Tumaila Mahladi. Tommy, good to see you again. This is a very sad story indeed, simply because there isn't that closure, and it doesn't look like it's going to arrive anytime soon.
Absolutely. It must be very, very harrowing for the families of those who perished in this very unfortunate building collapse in Nigeria. I mean, weeks after the incident, still not having any closure really, and not having any sense of when they can expect to lay to rest their loved ones and begin the process of mourning properly and putting to an end a very painful chapter in their lives. It must be absolutely horrible. So now we get a situation where Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, has had to come and stand in front of the nation and basically say it's not clear when the rest of the outstanding people's remains will be brought home. And I think Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, has really, shone in his role in trying to be the father figure and trying to be the voice of reason and trying to empathize with the families. Although he has a very difficult a role to play in bringing these bad news and bringing these sad updates, I think he's really carried himself very well, very dignified, and the families in some kind of way can take some kind of comfort in him giving these updates. But again, for those who want to close this chapter, it must be very, very terrible. A couple of factors come into play here. Nigerian authorities not really cooperating with the South African authorities in terms of the processes that have to happen before releasing the bodies. And once the bodies are released, we also have to understand that the conditions they've been kept in Nigeria, not necessarily the best of conditions, very humid, very hot, and with the state of the remains, unfortunately, the South African government has to be very careful in terms of when they return here, with relatives eager to identify and make sure that, yes, this is my relative that has passed away. They have to protect those people because from what we are hearing, the mortal remains of those who perished are not in a good state at all.
What is the actual hold-up, given that we have sent our experts to Nigeria to assist with the process of identification, of DNA profiling? Why hasn't that accelerated the process?
Well, it's now become an issue of bureaucratic red tape, because there are certain processes that have to be followed in Nigeria in terms of coroner's reports and issuing of death certificates that have to be followed, and without positive identification, of course, we seeming to hit a hurdle whereby people are so badly either decomposed already, their remains, or there's really not much to go with, struggling to identify who's who, and therefore how do you release remains without knowing exactly what's happening? So the processes that are in place in Nigeria are also not world class, if one has to put it that way. Although authorities are doing their best to try and expedite the process, they really have to make sure that the right remains go home. And this is seeming to be what is hitting a bit of a snag. So now the South African officials are finding themselves in a catch-22 situation. Do we take everything that is being given to us and bring it back home and then start the process back in South Africa? Because of course there are families that are in grief, grieving right now, and that are expecting answers, that are expecting their loved ones to be returned home. But then, of course, they're also conscious of the fact that they have to respect the laws of Nigeria and the processes in Nigeria, and they can only play an advisory and supporting role there. So it's becoming very, very difficult as the days drag on. It's becoming evidently clear that there is a big problem in terms of the processes and in terms of the capacity in Nigeria to expedite the process. Of course, South Africa and South Africans and the South African government want this to be done as quickly as possible so that the families can get closure and can mourn, and this painful chapter can be put to bed.
I mean, perhaps for us as South Africans who've never been to Nigeria and don't understand the processes there, it must be quite difficult to have to explain to South African families just how it works. And we know from the sort of reports we've been getting back from our own reporters on the ground there, the kind of stonewalling that takes place at every turn, at mortuaries, at hospitals, even for South African officials who tried to make headway. It was very difficult to obtain any information, to go and get that information by yourself as an individual was very difficult.
It was very difficult, and it comes back to the issue of jurisdiction. But having said that, though, I think that officials from our government are working very hard behind the scenes with authorities in Nigeria to try and basically cut through the red tape. It's an issue of jurisdiction. The Nigerian government would stress that they have got its own processes in terms of how it handles with situations like this. With deceased people, they have to be seen by the coroners. They have to be declared dead, and therefore, without having positive identification processes, it's very, very difficult to find out who's who, because they don't want to send back the wrong remains. Now, once that is done, then the second chapter comes in. They have to then get agreements to remove the mortal remains and bring them back to South Africa. So there's a whole lot of agreements and bilateral agreements that have to be adhered to, international law, but both, I think, governments are of the opinion that this matter has to be put to bed very, very quickly. The issue then as well now is preparing the families of those who have perished for the reality that they may not be allowed to view the mortal remains of those who are coming back. But then for the families, the question, Joanne, is, if you've lost a loved one, for closure, in many cultures here in South Africa, it's important to view the mortal remains and to identify them positively so that you can tell relatives, no matter what state it is, other relatives and family members, to say, yes, this is our loved one who's passed on, and for the burial rites, whichever culture they would have come from, to be done properly. So if the people are blocked from doing that, it creates a very difficult situation, because people aren't certain who or if this is indeed my loved one that is coming back, given the fact that they're not allowed to have access because of the state of the remains. And also it does create a health hazard, because we are being told that the conditions the remains are being kept in are very trying, what with rolling power blackouts and things like that, and refrigeration capacity not being up to state. It's got to be very, very difficult. But government's doing its best to try and offer support in the form of counseling services for those who are in mourning. But then again, this is where the story, I think, focus changes from the absolute shock and the tragedy of the incident, and looking for survivors and loved ones and what happened and who's to blame. Now it's the human interest story of families in mourning and what they have to deal with, the harrowing ordeal of being told that you may not be able to get the closure of seeing your loved one and doing the ritual rites, whichever culture you come from, which you need to do to help you in the mourning process. So this is what government has to deal with, and that's the next, I think, angle, if you would, from a journalistic point of view, that the story takes, the human angle, and that's where we see that it's really difficult.
It really is, even to report on. Tumali Matlali, thanks very much for putting us in the picture. He's, of course, our Africa producer.